wind whistled down the twisted trees, and it bore a whisper, a voice so cold that it could congeal blood in your veins. Mohsin trembled as he stepped onto the cobblestone path that led to the very center of the abandoned village. The heavens above hung heavy with an otherworldly crimson color, as if the skies themselves wept over this miserable land. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and rot, a stomach-churning reminder that something here had been dead for a long time, yet would not lie still. "This feels off," Alina said, clenching the folds of her shawl in her fists. Daniyal, being the cynic he was, laughed. "It's just a ghost town. Rumors and legend exaggerate the worst out of it." Abdullah looked at the shattered houses that flanked the abandoned streets. They had black empty windows that seemed like vacated eye sockets looking into a void. "Then why is it that I sense something's watching us?" he breathed. No one responded. Instead, they proceeded tentatively, the village engulfing them as though keen to welcome new victims. The Crimson Veil was no myth. It was a curse. It had passed down through many generations. There was a saying that many moons ago, there was a prospering village, but all ended when a mysterious woman wearing crimson came to live among them seeking refuge. However, she carried death with her. The villagers died one after another, each of their bodies drained of all blood, but their faces stayed frozen in horror. Nobody knew who or what she was or where she had come from, but by her presence the village had been transformed into a ghost land. Muaz raised the lantern as they walked further in the village square, its poor light dancing on the choking dark. "I don't think we should have come here," Farheen whispered. "Too late to do otherwise," Zishan replied. "We must try to find somewhere to stay before dark." Night. Saying the word alone made a shiver run down their spines. The tales foretold that night led them closer to her, the Veiled One, the Crimson Terror. As if on cue, the wind turned colder, the whispers louder. Then Hashim gasped. "Look at that!" In the center of the square was a very old well, its stone casing cracked with age. But it wasn't the well itself that chilled their blood. It was the thick, deep red mist shooting out of it, curling and twisting like ghostly fingers reaching for them. A soft, beckoning voice floated from the mist, a woman's voice. "Come closer." The team stood paralyzed, their hearts pounding. And then suddenly Khadijah screamed as some unseen presence caressed her ankle. The night was underway. The scream cut through the silent village, curving and rebounding off the crumbling walls like a chorus of the damned. Khadijah backed away from it, her breathing in hard little puffs as she brushed at her ankle wildly, but there was nothing there. Only the unyielding scarlet mist, twisting, observing. Mohsin rushed forward, seizing her by the shoulders. "Khadijah, what occurred? What touched you?" I don't know," she stuttered, eyes wide with fear. "Something cold, something alive." Daniyal let out a sharp breath, struggling to keep his voice steady. "It might be a rat," he argued. "Or—" "No!" Khadijah spat. "It wasn't an animal. It felt like fingers, clawing, pulling." The group shared uneasy glances, their fear thickening like the fog that curled around their feet. "We can't remain here," Muaz grumbled, his knuckles clenched over the lantern's handle. "We must look for a house, a secure one." "Provided it exists here," Zishan muttered to himself. They paced swiftly, their footsteps unnaturally quieted by the heavy atmosphere. Each darkness seemed to extend towards them, the buildings looming greedily in return. The whispers persisted, weaving through the darkness like filament, their phrases indistinguishable, yet unmistakably goading. Alina wrapped her shawl around her more tightly, her eyes flicking from one destruction to the next. "I hate this. I hate this so much." "We all do," Hashim grumbled. "But we have to keep going." And then abruptly, the whispers ceased. Silence. a silence so deep it pushed against their eardrums, making the thud of their own hearts sound loud. The wind died. The air froze. A door creaked open on their left. They twirled, bodies tensing. A house lay in front of them, its doorway gaping like a charred mouth. The door, apparently unbroken, creaked on rusty hinges. "No," Abdullah panted. "Definitely not." "Do you see any alternatives?" Mohsin choked. The house towered, its wooden structure creaking as if sensing their uncertainty. A shadow danced across the threshold. "We don't have a choice," Daniyal whispered. "We go in. Now." They entered. The door slammed shut behind them, and the whispers began again. This time, inside the house. The air within the house was heavy with rot and something worse. Something rotten. Something old. As soon as the door closed, the walls seemed to shut in, choking them in heavy darkness. The flickering lantern threw eerie, moving shadows on the walls, so that it seemed as if unseen presences lurked just beyond the edge of vision. "Light more lanterns," Mohsin breathed, his words hardly audible. "We have to see everything." Daniyal messed around with his pack, bringing out 2 additional lanterns and lighting them with shaking hands. The golden light did little to dispel the sense of doom. The home was strangely frozen, as though the inhabitants of the home had just disappeared mid-step. There was a wooden table in the middle of the room, plates still on top of it, though their contents had long disintegrated. Chairs were knocked over, some splintered as though something had happened to them. Farheen swallowed. "It's as though they were interrupted." "By what?" Zishan whispered. A noise, a soft dragging one from upstairs. Everyone held still. The sound crawled across the wooden beams, as if something heavy were dragged along the floor. And then it stopped. "We must get out," Khadija whispered, her nails biting into Mohsin's arm. "And go where?" Daniyal replied. "Out into the fog? Back into the whispers?" The dragging started up again, closer this time, and now another sound mixed in with it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, down the stairs. Mohsin clutched the closest chair, preparing to use it as a weapon. The air chilled with every step, breathing turning to mist. The lanterns danced crazily, and then, down the stairs, the crimson veil emerged. A figure swathed in crimson, her face hidden, her very presence screaming death. The whispers in the house swelled into a sound that was a scream of terror as she advanced another step further. The veil had fallen. The village of Qaim, which was once a quiet settlement, was now swimming in a sea of terror. Long shadows crept on the ground, and the wind carried the cries of the forgotten. Mohsin and his group, Daniyal, Abdullah, Hashim, Muaz, Zishan, Alina, Farheen, Hifsa, and Khadija, had gone deeper into the core of the darkness of the village, pulling out atrocities they never dreamed of. The air was heavy with a stifling silence, the type that ate away at one's mind. The decrepit, long-abandoned mansion in the center of the village towered above them like a beast, its blood-red walls speaking of a past soaked in gore. A lantern hung in the distance, but no hand wielded it. Alina wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. "We should go back," she breathed, her voice barely louder than the cold wind. "No," Mohsin declared, his gaze fixed on the dark building ahead of them. "We've come this far. We must know the truth." When they moved ahead, the door creaked open by itself, a foreboding welcome to the darkness. The air was thick with rot, making Farheen gag. Dust and cobwebs dangled like mourning drapes, hiding what was in the shadows. Hifsa trembled. "This place is haunted. We shouldn't have come here." Muaz pulled out the journal they had found in the last chapter. He opened its yellowed pages, pausing at one made more than 100 years before. "The veil must never be lifted. Blood must be shed to hold back the shadows," he read out. A high-pitched, shrill scream rent the air from above. The team stiffened, their breath catching in fear. They glanced around uncomfortably before Daniyal, the boldest among them, led the way up the spiral staircase. Every step creaked under their weight, as if telling them to go back. The walls had deep gashes and dried blood on the wooden floorboards. They came to a room at the end of the hall, its door slightly ajar, with a flickering candle inside. Hashim opened the door wider, and what they saw left them standing there. A figure stood in the middle of the room, covered in a red veil. Its head canted slowly, the veil moving just enough to show hollow, blackened eyes. The air thickened, choking them in a vice of fear. Zishan attempted to move back, but the door slammed shut behind them. The figure released a guttural whisper. "Why have you come?" Ebadullah knotted his fists. "We want the truth about this village." The figure chuckled, the sound ringing oddly, vibrating through their marrow. "Then you will pay the price." The candle's flame burned brightly, lighting up the room. Symbols in blood were drawn upon the walls, a ritual circle encircling a rotting skeleton prostrate in the corner. A mirror stood opposite, its surface undulating like turbulent water. Khadija gasped in shock. The legend. It's true. Then the veil started to lift. Shadows in the room began to twist and stretch, crawling towards them. The walls seemed to draw breath, thudding with a silent power. A piercing ache in Mohsin's chest came as a whisper crept into his head. "You cannot escape." They had unleashed something ancient, something evil. The crimson veil had been lifted, and the atrocities within were just starting to be revealed. The atmosphere within the mansion grew heavy with an oppressive presence, weighing down upon the group as if with unseen hands. The crimson-robed figure had disappeared, leaving its presence only in the soft whisper that remained in the dim room. Mohsin still felt the searing sensation on his chest, where the entity had left its silent mark. Daniyal's hand shook as he touched the old journal again, leafing through yellowed pages. "This house is alive," he growled. "It's sapping our fear." Farheen gulped hard, her eyes scanning the darkness-filled corners. "We have to leave here, now." But the house had other intentions. The mirror on the opposite wall shook with a violent tremor, its glass rippling like troubled water. A face that was not their own glared back. A woman in a red veil, her features hidden but her eyes. Her eyes burned with an otherworldly hunger. And then the whispers resumed, creeping through the air like ghostly fingers closing around their necks. "You have seen too much. The veil cannot be lifted without consequence." Hashim pushed at the door, but it wouldn't open. "We're trapped." A low, guttural moan reverberated off the walls. The blood symbols carved into the walls throbbed with a malevolent energy, reacting to an otherworldly pressure. The skeleton in the corner jerked, the bony fingers curling onto themselves. Muaz spun back to Mohsin, fear dancing in his eyes. "What do we do?" Before Mohsin was able to reply, the candle in the room went out, leaving them totally in the dark. Then, the screams. An unseen force pulled Zishan back, throwing him against the wall. His body jerked about as though something intangible was entering into his very body. Alina screamed, grasping at his arm, trying to tear him loose, but his eyes rolled back, his mouth opening on a silent scream. "Zishan!" Hifsa screamed. A cold gust of air swept across the room, and the mirror suddenly shattered. The image of the veiled woman broke into 1,000 shattered fragments, each voice whispering in a twisted unison. "One must stay. One must take my place." The truth dawned on Mohsin like a blow. The crimson veil was not merely a myth, it was a curse, and it required an offering. Ebadullah ground his fists into his palms. "We must destroy it." "How?" Khadija wept, her words shaking. "We don't even know what it is." The shards of the mirror started to levitate, whirling around in midair like sharp knives. Each one of them targeted the group, poised to strike. Mohsin did the only thing he could think of. He seized the journal and ripped out the last page, exposing an incantation written in blood-red ink. The veil binds the soul. The veil seals the fate, but the veil must be burned to break the gate. Without delay, he set the page alight with the candle flame and hurled it at the mirror. Fire flared, engulfing the accursed glass. The veiled woman shrieked an unholy cry, her body contorting and twisting as the flames consumed her. The mansion shook, its walls creaking and splitting. The floor symbols disappeared, and the heavy air dissipated. The force that kept them there began to dissipate. With the flames burning, the door to the room exploded open. A brilliant white light spilled in, and they stumbled out one by one into the hallway. Zishan fell, gasping for air. "Is it over?" The mansion creaked one final time before the whole building started to cave in on itself. They rushed towards the door, their hearts thumping, just in time as the roof collapsed, engulfing the atrocities inside. A moment of silence was followed by an instant of stillness. Then, out of the wreckage, a whisper crawled through the darkness. "The veil is never truly lifted." A cold chill ran down Mohsin's back. They had escaped, but the nightmare was far from being over. The night was yet to be over. Standing outside the decaying mansion, Mohsin and the others faced the biting cold of the night as the wind howled through the hollow remains of the village. They had escaped by a hair's breadth, yet an eerie sense of foreboding hung in the air. Daniyal breathed deeply, his hands trembling. "We burned the mirror. We broke the curse. Didn't we?" Mohsin gritted his teeth. "Then why does it still feel like we're being watched?" The others looked at each other nervously. Hifsa hugged herself, shivering even though it wasn't cold. The veil. It whispered something before the house fell. It said, "The veil is never truly lifted." What does that mean? Zishan, who was still shaken by the attack within, wiped his brow with a sweat-dampened hand. "Perhaps it's trying to frighten us. Perhaps it's just—" He was interrupted by a low, guttural voice that seemed to reverberate through the rubble. "One must stay. One must fill my position." The group stood in terror. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, chilling their blood. Farheen leaned back against a tree. No, we finished it. We destroyed it." Alina gestured to the ground. "Then why is the village still cursed?" Under their feet, the ground split open, dark mist spilling out. The air thickened with an unnatural energy, weighing on them like an unseen hand. Hashim's eyes widened suddenly. His fingers jerked spasmodically, his body thrashing in savage convulsions. "It's inside me." Muaz clutched his shoulders, attempting to hold him upright. "Fight it! Don't let it get you!" But Hashim's eyes rolled back, his mouth opening as the same whispering voice came from his throat. "The veil demands sacrifice. The blood must continue." Mohsin moved quickly. He grabbed the last pages of the journal, searching for clues. There has to be something here, some way to prevent this. The journal shook in his hand, and the ink on the pages changed, creating new words before their eyes. The veil cannot be destroyed. It can only be transferred. Mohsin read the words out loud, and a hush settled over the group. Ebadullah spoke barely above a whisper. "It takes someone to stand in for the last soul that burned." Khadija had her hand clamped over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. No, we can't." Hashim emitted an otherworldly shriek, his body contorting as a red light shrouded him. The damned energy had selected him. Mohsin's brain whirled. They had mere seconds to act. "There must be some other option," Daniyal yelled. But the ground shook once more, and the damned mist grew denser around Hashim. The decision was being taken out of their hands. Farheen, sobbing, moved forward. We can't lose him." Alina clutched her arm, holding her back. "We'll all be lost if we don't do something!" The voice came back, whispering among the trees. "One must stay! One must be my substitute!" Time was up. Mohsin glanced at the journal, then at his friends. They had made it this far. Could they outrun the inevitability? Could they resist the Veil's command? Or would one of them have to be left behind, trapped under the crimson veil forever? The darkness spread into an abyss of terrors as Mohsin and his friends faced the approaching darkness. The accursed mist danced around Hashim, his body shaking beneath the weight of the entity that wanted to consume him. The whispers of the crimson veil reverberated through the ruins, insidious and relentless. "One must stay. One must fill my position." Hashim emitted a pained shriek, his eyes burning with a fierce crimson as the power inside him grew. The others held back, aware that anything they did might seal their destinies for eternity. Time was running out, and the ultimate choice hung like a guillotine over their heads. Mohsin ground his fists into his palms, his thoughts in a whirl. "There has to be some way to prevent this. There has to be." Daniyal ground his teeth, advancing. "We can't let Hashim be captured. We've traveled too far to lose anyone now." Ebadullah wildly searched through the journal, the pages turning by themselves as if some invisible hand were moving them. The ink spread, changing into new letters. "The veil cannot be destroyed. It can only be appeased." Alina shivered. "Appeased? What is that supposed to mean?" Muaz replied, his voice empty. "It means that someone will have to freely give its place. The curse requires a soul." Silence held the group in its metal grip. They stared at each other, the reality they did not want to face. Someone had to be left behind. Farheen brushed away her tears, her head shaking with vehemence. "No, there's got to be another option. We can't just sacrifice someone." Khadija gripped Alina's hand, her voice barely audible. Perhaps if we refuse, the veil will shatter." But Hashim's body twisted in torment, his cries rising to guttural, monstrous roars. The creature was ripping him asunder, speeding the group's choice beyond what they were ready for. Mohsin's face set in a hard line. "Number, if we refuse, it will take him against his will, and then it will take us all." Ebadullah breathed unsteadily. "Then we decide." They all stared at one another, terror etched on their faces. Who of them would carry this weight? Who of them would volunteer to walk into the void? Zishan shut his eyes, muttering a prayer. Then he said, "I will do it." Gasps resounded around him. Farheen shook her head in horror. "Number Zishan, you can't." He smiled, his smile sad and knowing. "Someone has to, and if it's me, at least I choose it. I won't let it take Hashim." Alina's eyes pricked with tears. "We'll find another way." "There is no other way." Zishan walked into the swirling mist, its fingers grasping out for him with an eagerness. The whispers became a louder chorus, their approval of his decision. "You all have a chance now. Live. Get out of here and never look back." Mohsin's throat constricted. "We won't forget you." Zishan nodded, then turned to present himself to the entity. "Take me. Let them go." The veil trembled. A scream rent the air, deafening in its intensity, as the mist charged at Zishan, swallowing him whole. The others stood frozen, horror-struck, as his body was borne aloft, his eyes locking onto theirs before being lost in the emptiness. And then, silence. The air clarified, the darkness lifting. The mist dissipated, dispersing on the wind as if it had never existed. The crimson veil had been appeased. The team remained in frozen silence. The village that was once crumbling and cursed was now ominously still. The dark burden of evil had been lifted, but at a terrible price. Farheen wept against Alina's shoulder. Hashim sank to his knees, his weakened body free from possession. Mohsin's fists were clenched. "We need to leave, now." No one protested. They walked away from the rubble into the faint light of dawn. Their testing had ended, but they knew that they would never be able to escape what had occurred. The wind bore a final whisper as they departed. The veil is never truly lifted. Thanks for coming along on this frightening ride through the Crimson Veil. If you liked the story and want to hear more chilling stories, don't forget to like this video to help the channel. Leave a comment below with your opinions and theories. Subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss another horror tale. Stay tuned for more nightmares to come, if you dare.